Biological basis of behavior, Unit 4. I did this video already, but it was too long. So I had to redo it, and I'm gonna do it in sections. Okay. Let's start with the neuroanatomy and organization of the nervous system. So neuroanatomy basically means the study of the structure of the nervous system. There is the central nervous system, which is it controls the actions and the interactions that you have between the other parts of your body. It's basically your brain and your spinal cord. I think it's in the center of your body. Basically, there's a whole history of the brains, whatever. So you have the brain, and then you have meninges. You're gonna see me mispronouncing this entire chapter, so you know what? Bear with me. With meninges, you have the dura mater, the arachnoid matter, and then you have the pia mater. Dura mater is the outermost layer. The arachnoid mater is the spider web layer. The middle arachnoid spider is spider web. Pia mater is a soft inner layer. The meninges protect the brain. Remember this. Then inside the skull, there is the cerebral fluid that protects the brain. Remember that the brain is just like floating on a bunch of fluid. The medulla oblongata, which we'll talk about later, the spinal cord goes up to it, and then it relays messages. Then there's the peripheral nervous system, which is basically connects everything except your brain and your spinal cord, and it basically deals with everything else you do. There's two main parts of the peripheral nervous system. There's the motor pathway and there's the sensory pathway. Motor pathway, think of motor motion. You move from your brain to your body to make it move. And then there's the sensory pathway, which are your senses. You feel with your body, and then it senses your brain. My goodness. And the autonomic nervous, oh shit, I'm lying too. Then we have those two. The motor pathway, then it's divided into another two. There's the somatic nervous system, which is somandic. You saw a man dick and you ran after it. It deals with movement. From the brain to the skeleton is voluntary. And then there's the autonomic nervous system, which is automatic. Basically, in the autonomic nervous system, there's two different parts. There's the sympathetic nervous system and there's the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is your emergency response. Kapow, ka-chow, you saw a snake, you ran. It deals with the fight or flight syndrome, etc. The parasympathetic nervous system cancels it out and it kind of like slows it down. The reflex arc is basically this whole thing that deals with your reflexes. It goes, instead of going to your brain, it goes straight to your spinal cord. This little chart, if you want, can help you. It's really cute. If you want, I'll put it down. The nervous system. Okay, neurons and neural anatomy. So I'm gonna get into neurons, and before I talk about like the actual brain structure, okay. So just bear with me. Neuroanatomy. So the actual neuroanatomy of the brain. There are neurons. Neurons are the most important part of the brain. They connect everything. They're bomb. Nerves are basically a bunch of neurons. Axons are things inside of the cell body. For example, like fibers. The cranial nerves are nerves that come out of the brain. That's pretty relevant. Bunch of neurons contract. Glial cells are basically cells that heal and they protect neurons. They're super important. They're also in like the regular body. They heal cells. Neurodiversity. So basically, neurons can come in like a bunch of different shapes and sizes. Neurons are basically there's the same like things-ish as the nervous system. There's sensory neurons, so you sense. It's the same thing that I told you for semantic, unless I'm wrong, whatever. Sensory nervous system, your senses. Sensory neurons, it sends signals. You fucking senses, you feel. It's also called afferent. It goes from your spinal cord to your brain. Then the motor neurons, which is from your brain to the muscle, actual movement. Oh, sensory is from muscle to brain. Interfere neurons, or neurons that connect neurons. Neural structure. So basically the structure of the actual neuron. Here, look, I'm gonna give you this girl and she's gonna help you out. So, you have this little guy right here called the soma. The soma is the head of the body, the head of the actual thing. Inside here, there's like everything, like the proteins, the nucleus. Then in here, you have these little things right here, these little like branches that are called dendrites. Dendrites connect with other neurotransmitters. Then they take neurons. No, I mean they take neurotransmitters. Then there's this long thing. It's called the axon. The axon is where the cell communicates from one part to the other part electrically. Electrically. There's things called the meningles, right? Meningles. No, kidding. I'm lying to you. The myelin sheet. The myelin sheet. What's that word? Insulates the neuron, which makes it go faster. Then there's in this side you have the thing in the branches, the terminal branches. The terminal branches communicate with other neurons, and there's the terminal buttons, which inside terminal buttons there are vesicles. Inside vesicles, there's neurotransmitters, which are super important. Communication among other neurons. So neurons fire. So here's a neuron. The neuron just talked to another neuron. The neuron got a signal. The soma, which is the head, remember? The dendrites around the soma got it through the soma, went through across the axon electrically, and then it went to the terminal branches. And all of this is electrically. Keep in mind that when the other neuron sends a signal to this neuron, if it doesn't have enough stimulus, it's not going to react at all. That is called the all or none principle. Overall, remember when I told you that it was going through this part right here, communicating through the axon? The axon itself, it always has a negative charge. It has inside potassium, which is positive, and chlorine, which is negative. Inside of it is like a whole line of chlorine, which is why the resting potential is charged -70. But then when it's the process of it being activated, makes it positively charged, which is then called action potential. So remember, resting potential negative when it's chilling, and then action potential when the action is happening. Then there is the threshold, which is when it's like at its maximum point, and then refractory period right after it happens, it's closed. Like remember when a guy jizzes and you can't jizz again? That's basically it. Life and death of the neuron. When you don't use the neuron, girl, they die. The trail between the neurons dies. Concussion is basically when you hit your head. Monatomic crisis occurs where the blood flow is focused on one part of the brain. Chronic trauma and some shit. CTE, basically brain damaged, often preserved. Neuroplasticity, though, there's a lot of neuroplasticity in this chapter. Neuroplasticity talks about how your brain has the ability to regenerate and to mold over to new ways. I want to finish before it's 10 minutes. Neurotransmitters. There's a bunch of different types of neurotransmitters. Remember how I told you that inside the vesicles, neurotransmitters, those communicate chemically. Neurotransmitter, chemical. Neurotransmitter, chemical. Okay. So basically, the neurotransmitters in the vesicles shoot out chemically, and in this process called synapse, they attach to the receptors of the other neurons. Depending on what type of neurotransmitter is going to attach differently, it's going to have a different action. Though some are absorbed enough for the activation to happen, but the ones that weren't, they float around and they get reabsorbed, which is a process called reuptake. There's the function. There's two different types of neurotransmitters. There's excitatory, which basically excite. They make other neurons go faster. And then there's inhibitory, which slows them down and prevents them from firing. Then we get to actual neurotransmitters. There's the acetylcholine, ACH, which basically as you move your acetylcholine, controls movement, plays a role in memory, and if you block, you can't move, for example, on natives. Serotonin, which is really important. It controls your mood, your hunger, your emotion, your sleep, and your sex drive. I think I remember like sex, autonomy, love to sex. Only 10 are produced for the brain, most important, blah, blah, blah. High level of increased happiness, decreased depression. Depression is treated with SSRI, which produces more serotonin. So if you're depressed, have some extra serotonin. Dopamine, you're feeling dope. It's the pleasure central. It's good to feel dope. It drives you to do things that please you. It's low in response to drugs. It affects alertness, happiness, and motor coordination, and it controls muscles in some ways. Epinephrine is basically the endocrine system. It's basically like your adrenaline and your high emotional response. Then there's the norepinephrine, which is your response to danger. It's like epinephrine, you're screaming because you saw a bear is going to kill you. That is basically adrenaline that controls the fight or flight system. Syndrome, it increases blood pressure, heart pressure. It develops fears, and if you have a low level of norepinephrine, you will be depressed. GABA, which is just GABA aminobutyric acid, it slows things down, it calms you down. GABA, think of babies, GABA. Glutamine is the opposite, it's an excitatory. Glutamine, think glutes, the butt makes you excited. It increases your alertness. Then there's neuropeptides, which regular activity. Endorphins and your feelings, it relieves pain and stress. Agonist and antagonist. We're gonna come back to those in the most recent chapter. Agonists are basically neurotransmitters that make things stronger. It makes them stronger, independent black women. And then antagonists are basically, it blocks them from happening. Oxytocin controls love and social bonding. For example, a mother with a baby. Fun fact: when a mother is breastfeeding a baby, oxytocin is going to the baby. That's why mothers are so attached to the baby, making vice versa. Drugs imitate the act of neurotransmitters and they take up the same receptors. And then there's basically a whole chain of neurotransmitters that work together and connect everything together, and those are called neural networks. 10